Hi, my name's Anna Serin, and I'm Director of Listings Development with the Canadian Securities Exchange. You're joining us for another market recap. It is August 20th, 2021, and I am joined by my wonderful co-host, Bruce Campbell with StoneCastle Investment Management. Thank you for joining me, Bruce.
Yeah, good to be back after a week off.
After a week off, we, of course, had your wonderful colleague, Jordan Newell, who joined us last week. I believe there's an internal race of numbers who's viewing what market recap when he joins in. So I haven't looked recently, but I'm sure we'll knock their socks off today and you'll be back up there.
His family's way bigger than mine. That's probably why.
Exactly. He's doling out 20 somewhere. Okay, well, thank you for joining me again. Market recap. There was a bunch happening this week that we're going to dive into. You kind of feel the energy at this time of the summer. I have to say the first 2 weeks is always pretty quiet in the markets, and you can start to feel that energy beginning for the fall and all the activity that will ensue. We're going to talk about some volatility that was on the rise this week. We're going to talk about a commodity sell-off. Oil had a rough week. We're going to talk about a big purchase. Tilray purchased some convertible debt from MedMen, a CSE issuer. We're going to dive into that and what happened after the fact. Elon Musk, he's back at it. He unveiled the Tesla bot, and in an interesting manner. We're going to break down what that is, and then we'll get into some CSE issuer news, some new issuers that I'm excited about. So let's start chatting about volatility. What happened this week, Bruce? There's a lot going on in the world.
Yeah, there sure was a lot going on this week. From a macro perspective, there's just a ton, right? I mean, first off, obviously this Delta variant is really ramping up around the world. Lots of concern. Everything that was going to open now, there's been lots of stuff that's been delayed. Cases are rising. People are worried about, whether or not we have to shut down again. That's obviously weighing on the markets, on what the growth forecasts were. And that's had a big impact. Obviously, Afghanistan and everything that's going on there, that's not settling for the market. Anytime there's uncertainty like that, market really doesn't like that. And then throw on top of that, the Fed, the minutes were out from their last meeting, and they were definitely talking about the fact that they could be looking at tapering the buying by the end of this year, and that they would look to potentially increase interest rates. So, on the Fed front, obviously, we'll probably get more, not this weekend, but the following weekend when they meet at their annual Jackson Hole meeting, and there'll probably be a lot of people watching to see, exactly what comes out of that. But you sort of throw all three of those together, and it meant that the markets were really volatile this week, both up and down.
Absolutely. So a few things I wanted to mention. Tapering, I wanted to explain this to people so that they understand. Tapering is the reduction of at which the central bank accumulates new assets, which are typically bonds, onto their balance sheet. And typically this is a sign of winding down monetary stimulus programs. I think that this is probably as a reaction to the fact that, there's been such great recovery in the economy after the pandemic. But then, of course, now we're seeing the Delta variant. 83% of COVID cases in the U.S. are currently deemed as the Delta variant. So there's kind of this other, thing on the rise. Afghanistan is tragic what's happening. And I know that there is some kind of market reaction to that. And a big part of it has to do with the U.S. and the money that they've spent over there. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean that, and obviously instability, obviously always is something that concerns the market, right? And that's what we're seeing there for sure.
Well, the Taliban doesn't like the West, so I think that's probably a big part of the uncertainty and maybe adding to that volatility.
Yeah, for sure it has. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Commodity. What happened with the commodity sell-off this week? Oil had a rough week.
Yeah. Well, when we throw on top of what we just talked about, the fact that now the market's quite concerned about growth and where the growth is going to come from. You throw on top of that with Delta, really starting to accelerate. Now we're seeing, the recovery trade starting to fade a bit. And I mean, obviously part of that's, you saw a lot of people who were looking to travel in, sort of Q3, Q4 of this year have now, canceled trips. They've postponed trips. And so that pushes all that out. And so, oil demand isn't going to be where maybe it necessarily was expected to be. And so as a result, we've seen 7 down days in the price of oil. And you can see from the chart here that even, from back in June, it really topped out and has been, sort of more or less sliding backwards since then. That's it's been fairly dramatic for sure. We're probably due for a bounce, or short-term bounce.
Well, we'll see what happens. I know that a big part of kind of this Delta variant as well is that it's affected supply chains, right? And that might not be great on commodities either.
Yeah, no, obviously that has an impact for sure. And, in addition to that, what we've seen is that the US dollar, after bottoming in June, it started to look like it's at the point where it could almost break out above where it was back then, back in March when it was at its high. And, one of the things I like to present, and we show quite often on the show, is the relative rotation graphs, the RRG. And you can see that the US dollar has actually moved into the improving quadrant. So historically, when we see stronger US dollars, that means commodities are weaker. It also typically means that there's some sort of flight to safety with the markets. So, the US dollar is thought of as obviously as the world reserve currency. And so typically when, the markets get a little bit more volatile, people move their assets into US, either treasuries or, kind of those big US cap names from a market perspective. So we are definitely seeing a bit of change in tone in investors' sentiment.
Absolutely. Well, it'll be an interesting fall. Okay, let's talk about a big transaction that we saw this week. So this was Tilray. Tilray trades on the Toronto Stock Exchange, and it purchased convertible debt from MedMen, which is a Canadian securities exchange company. They've been an issuer of ours for a few years. Now, first, I just need to explain why this happened, just the background of this for those that don't know. Because cannabis is still federally illegal in the US. The Toronto Stock Exchange came out and said that if it's federally illegal, no plant touching issuers can list with us. This has been difficult for some of the big players in Canada that are listed with the Toronto Stock Exchange, because how could you miss out on the opportunity down the US? And there's some big companies that have come out of it. So this is kind of a strategic way that they're trying to figure out how they can participate and not completely miss the opportunity. So what they've done is they've purchased the debt in the amount of 166 million from MedMen. MedMen has had a rough few years, as we all know. And so they've purchased that debt off of them. First of all, what do you think of this type of a transaction?
Well, in actual fact, they didn't purchase it from MedMen. They actually bought it from Gotham Green. So Green owned the debt, and obviously that allowed them to, especially if they convert it, to be in a controlling position of MedMen or a fairly substantial position. And so what they did is they bought it off of Gotham Green, and so that had really no impact necessarily directly on MedMen, but all part of the transaction was MedMen also raised $100 million US in a private placement, which of course, does two things. One is with Tilray holding that debt, they extended the maturity on it. So it just means that, MedMen has a little bit longer before they need to pay that back. They now have somebody that they know potentially is buying that debt to pick up MedMen if and when legalization happens in the US. But the question obviously just with that would be, well, how is MedMen going to grow? Well, they were able to then go out and raise 100 million US from some investors, which they'll then use to grow and expand. And MedMen's had obviously a fairly checkered past. They've got probably one of the best brands in the US as far as cannabis goes, but they obviously had lots of challenges coming out of the gate with with their stock and the market. And obviously this now hopefully turns things around, and it gives them a potential to be taken out if legalization happens by Tilray down the road.
Right. And so here's something interesting. I mean, I think MedMen, my personal opinion, did one of the best jobs of branding of all the Canada. I mean, that's the big race down in the US, is this desire for branding. They had, when they first came out, they had an amazing reel that was done by Spike Jonze, I believe. And it was actually quite beautiful and stunning how they did it. I remember going to MJ Biz for the first time in Las Vegas, and the taxis were, MedMen taxis. So they were coined at one point the Apple of the cannabis space. I think that's the one thing, no matter what has happened in their past, their brand has stayed with them. And that is a huge part of their value add. So, they unload this, the debt that's on the books to Tilray. Tilray has 6 months upon decriminalization in the US that they have to convert that debt. So that's their opportunity for them. At the time of, so this is interesting, at the time of conversion, it's estimated it would be 21% of the company. Explain to me how this works. So if it's 21% of the company and then they go out and raise 100 million, is it really 21% anymore?
Yeah, well, they also got some warrants associated with that. So there's some warrants that were associated. So that probably keeps their share ownership at the same level.
Right. Well, good for them. I mean, MedMen, it really does have that brand. That has been a huge raise for all companies out there. They've done an amazing job in that regard. One thing I wanted to explain to our viewers, because this word doesn't come up that often, the 100 million that they raised from the private equity firm, those shareholders, or most of those shareholders, have decided to backstop. Can you explain to us what a backstop financing means?
Well, they basically came in on a private basis when it wasn't a marketed deal. They did this arrangement with MedMen directly, and they've obviously written a really substantial check, right?
Right. And so, but essentially the backstop means that if they are unable to raise the 100 million, that the shareholders who have said that they would backstop, they'll fill in the gap. So if they can only raise 60, one of those shareholders will write a check for 40. That shows a lot of confidence in my view of the people that are getting involved, wouldn't you say?
It does. And I mean, these are fairly astute investors. Michael Soria is the name that was mentioned in the press release. And I mean, he's done exceptionally well with Verano and with it, with its financing and with its listing.
Absolutely. Well, good for you guys, my men. You unloaded that debt and you've raised some cash. Go back out there and shine. Okay, let's talk about Elon Musk. I feel like it's just a great week when we talk about cannabis and Elon Musk. Bruce, so Elon Musk, what did he do this week?
Well, he got the promotion machine ramped up again today when they had a press release or a press conference where they announced that they're going to come out with a robot, and it's going to basically be a human-like robot. And so, in the press release, they had a great sort of Elon Musk-ish demonstration. This robot, as you can see here, came out, and the best part is when he starts to dance around. I don't think the actual robot will be able to do this, but certainly it made the press release or the press conference quite interesting for sure. Who knows if this is a product that Tesla ever brings to market, but the conference itself was interesting.
Oh my goodness. I love the pre-stage moment where Elon is telling this dancer, like, okay, look, I want you to dance like this and this. This is really important in, what I've developed. So it was always entertaining as he does. One thing I thought was interesting is he unveiled the Tesla bot. So the Tesla bot is, it works on the same AI that is in their vehicles. It's meant to replace work that is boring, repetitive, and dangerous. So first of all, I thought it was interesting that dangerous was the third point of it. The first was boring. It's meant to replace work that is boring, repetitive, and dangerous. Do you think this is going to be a thing in our future, Bruce?
They must be targeting all us finance nerds because the robot came out and started dancing. So that's like repetitive and dangerous work. So clearly they was going right at us all as finance nerds.
Yeah, I don't know. To me, I'm questioning this. He wants it to be at a price point that people can afford. He wants this to be in everyone's household. So Jetsons, here we come. Okay, we're going to dive into some CSE issuer news. We have some new issuers that I wanted to mention. Delta Clean Tech commenced trading on the CSE. They've been around. They're based out of Alberta. They've been around since 2004. I think there's a chance we might have talked about them before, Bruce. But these are really really interesting companies that are coming to market. So it's a global leader in environment and social governance, ESG. We hear the word ESG a lot. And I find this interesting. This is why I think we've talked about them before, is their technology is around CO2 capturing, which is a bit of an industry that's really starting to evolve, wouldn't you say?
It sure is. I mean, it's right now it's huge. Everyone's talking about that.
Yeah, and I think that it's kind of a neat business model. I can't say this for sure, but I think a big part of that business model is the capturing. You get, there is a revenue stream, because as you capture it, then there's kind of, money attached to capturing CO2 out of the atmosphere, and then they can sell it to other companies and offside. Okay, another company that I want to mention is POKO Innovations. POKO Innovations is a UK company. I thought this was a really neat company, and to be honest, I'm surprised we haven't seen more of this. They are based out of the UK. They completed an RTO with a company on the TSX Venture and came over to us. So welcome, POKO. We're excited to have you. But I was intrigued by this one because it is... it has a bunch of different stuff on it, but a big part of it is the branding around skin creams and, everything that you kind of use as far as maintaining yourself, creams, hair elixirs, all that type of stuff. And it's CBD infused. I really thought that this part of the market would come much sooner than it did. I feel like it's going to be in my shampoo. It's going to be in my face cream. Do you think we're going to see more and more of this? Or do you think this is kind of one of the few?
No, that's certainly the trend, right? If you look in the US, they have, you can get infused potato chips if you want. So I think that that's going to be the trend here for sure. Cosmetics, hair care products, all of those will probably one day you'll be able to pick, your favorite brand and it'll be infused with CBD.
Right. Well, the health benefits, they say, are amazing. I'm surprised that it's taken this time to get there. The cannabis just, it was out of the gate and even had jurisdictional restrictions as far as legality. But CBD, obviously doesn't have the psychoactive element to it. So I would have thought we would have seen more of it. And I think, I think this is going to be a really big disruptor in the industry. So welcome, POKO. Excited to have you guys here. The one last thing I want to mention as far as CSE news is that Wealthsimple has now taken on some CSE issuers. Not all CSE issuers. They do have, certain restrictions on which ones can join. But this is pretty exciting for us. It just adds a lot more liquidity for our issuers. Obviously, Wealthsimple is kind of the Canadian version of Robinhood. It allows, and it really has attracted kind of that next generation of retail investor. So thank you, Wealthsimple, for taking on our issuers. We have some great ones out there, and congratulations to our issuers who are now part of that trading capability. So congrats. Bruce, what should we think about going into next week?
Well, obviously the market's had a rough week, especially in the commodity sector here. I think that's probably a little bit overdone on the short term. So, we're kind of watching to see what kind of bounce we see next week and then what that means for the markets. Do things start to settle down when you see, the headlines of the Fed war and commodity sell off? You sort of have to wonder, is that a point where, you got the maximum pessimism and, the market starts to go the other way. So that's one of the things we're watching for next week.
Yeah, there's lots going on kind of on a global scale. So my heart goes out to Afghanistan and its people. My heart goes out to, again, in your neck of the woods, Bruce, is what's going on with the fires. There's so many amazing firefighters and aid that's come from, I think, all over the place. There's a bunch of firefighters from Mexico that have come up. So my thoughts go out to all of you and hope that we get some more rain.
Yeah, and apparently they've done an amazing job protecting people's homes here. So hats off to them for sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you again, Bruce. Have a wonderful weekend and look forward to seeing you next week.
Sounds good. See you next week.
Thank you.